add more and more thing to that. So I think it's interesting. I heard something that made me realize, like, oh yeah, that's so obvious, but I didn't think of it until I heard it. One person was saying, when he was talking about, I believe it was Thinking Basketball, the YouTube channel, he was saying that, man, it is super foggy out here. I just want to show you. Sorry, I don't even know I can't change camera when I'm doing this. All right, never mind, but I'm just going, yeah. Anywho, so he was saying that, people say that older generations of basketball players were not as good three-point shooters as current generations. They didn't shoot as many, they didn't shoot as high percentage. And I mean, the percentages aren't so different, but he said, look at free throw shooting. It's not necessarily about skill level, as more was about emphasis. Look at free throw shooting. There are relatively the same number of great 90% free throw shooters in the league today as there were 20, 30, 40 years ago. Why? Because the hard work, the skill was there. It was just a matter of emphasis. And I think that's an important part to include in the idea of looking at current generations to old generations. Of course, there's always things like rule changes. There's always things like different interpretation of rules if rules aren't necessarily changing, like the double dribble / carry rule. It's not necessarily that the rule changed, the interpretation changed. As well as traveling, it's not necessarily that the rule changed. If you step on your pivot foot, it's a travel. If you step with your pivot foot, it's a travel. But the interpretation changed to what made the pivot foot, right? So that's something. And then obviously, true, refs just stopped calling it as well. But that's a big thing. That it's not necessarily about hard work. It's not necessarily about skill. It's more about emphasis, more about training and practice. I remember another great video I saw on it was like a TED Talk, a TEDx talk, and he was saying, are athletes truly greater than they used to be? Right? Like, as humans, have we developed physically more than we used to? And so his main point, like, that was like the title to catch you in, but the main point was just that our science, our development, our recruiting, these things have really drastically improved, whereas the skill level or the natural talent, the natural physical blessing that we have has not necessarily changed that much. And I think it's a great point, and if you ever get a chance to watch that TED Talk, go watch it. But the main idea is, he used one great example, I thought, of runners, right? That before a certain point in time, only one person had reached this running threshold, right? Was able to finish, like, I don't remember, it was a 100-meter dash under so many seconds, right? But after a certain threshold, multiple people done it, right? And so what was the biggest change? One of the biggest changes were the material that they used to run on. They changed it from, I think, like plain old dirt to like some other type of turf, and that led to an increase in time. And even runners who experienced that change, who were alive during this change period, they even said that, yes, I got faster after this change. And so they attributed that. And when he retroactively went back and changed the approximate times of those runners, it was like one person before the era had reached this record limit, and then like 25 people after the era reached the record limit. When he added this change in time because of the turf, it was then became 12 people before the era, one compared to one, instead of just one compared to 25 after the era. So I thought that was very interesting. And another point he made is that we're better at recruiting, we're better at finding better players. I think that's also very true for basketball. Guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo 50 years ago would never even be looked at to be in the NBA, but today he's a two-time MVP and a champion. And then also looking at, he used the example of gymnastics, where we got better as a world at looking for properly physically suited people for that role. And so whereas basketball, we're finding more players who are physically talented. And if you look at basketball, the average height has been around 6'7", 6'6" for a long time. Like, you go to basketballreference.com and you look that up, I'm telling you, it's a long time, more than you expect. Like, you would expect the 1970s, 1960s, where Wilt Chamberlain was dominating. I think 1970, it was 6'6", 6'7", which is the same as today's 6'6", 6'7". I think early 2000s was 6'7", and then I think more recently, the 2010s, it became 6'6" again. But like, the average height of the player is the same. And to me, that suggests that we're just finding a lot of different players, but the skill level necessary, the hard work necessary, balances it back out. But again, going back to what I was saying about the video, he was saying that while in NBA we're better at finding players who are tall and then making them skilled and making sure the skilled ones get in. When it came to gymnastics as a world and as a gymnastics community, they were getting better at finding smaller people, smaller athletes to compete. The average height of the gymnast went down, which was a direct correlation because of gymnasts needing a smaller body to perform the twirling and the spinning and the whoop-de-whoops that they do be doing. So I thought that was very cool and a great point that should be made when it comes to looking at current generations, previous generations, and even future generations. I watched a video by Johnny Arnett talking about how Damian Lillard is following the perfect recipe. Like if his career ended today, hopefully not, but he following the perfect recipe of a lot of great NBA players of the past to be remembered, to not be remembered in 20 years. In 20 years, he's following a recipe that if his career ended today, no one's going to remember him. Just like 20 years ago or further back, great players who've done as much as he did or even more than he did aren't remembered today by young people. So it's a great thing to be very important, and that there's always the generational gap that you talk about within families, but that exists everywhere, and how we as human beings should be more aware and be more respectful, not only to our elders, but also to the generations that come later. To be merciful to them, as the hadith of Rasulullah said, right? That I don't remember the exact hadith, so I'm paraphrasing, but be respectful to your elders and be merciful to your youngsters, right? Why is that such an important thing? Because you got to respect those who came before you, even though now you're developing those techniques, right? Your father took 50 years to learn how to become the carpenter he was, but he was able to teach you his carpentry skills in 10 years. Now you think you're better than him because you're developing your own techniques. But you got to give respect because you could never develop those techniques if it wasn't for him. And similarly, when your son that you've been training to be a carpenter for 50 years, and you have a son that you're training to be a carpenter, and he learns all your techniques within 10, 20 years, and now you have to be merciful to him that, okay, don't be such a hard rear end to this young man that is now learning from you. Don't be like, like a lot of NBA players and NBA vets, they look at current generation like, oh, they wouldn't make it in my league. Be respectful to your elders because they are what makes you, but also be merciful to your youngster because there's what's going to be in the future and they're learning from you and they need to be respectful to you too. So it's a two-way street. Appreciate y'all for watching.